Welcome to the historic Ocean House, a luxurious hotel that pays homage to New England's golden age of hospitality. With timeless elegance and renewed civility, this treasured resort is the setting for our special broadcast of the Ocean House Author Series. Each program features nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation, hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. WCRI is pleased to partner with the Ocean House to present this ongoing series, which brings you the best and the brightest of the literary world. Now, let's take you to the Ocean House.
Meghan Jarvis is a podcast host, Grief is My Side Hustle, two-time TEDx speaker, and psychotherapist specializing in trauma, grief, and loss. After experiencing PTSD following the deaths of both her parents, Meghan and her team help employers address complex emotions such as grief in the workplace. She is currently at work on Can Anyone Tell Me Why? 25 Essential Questions About Grief and Loss, which publishes with Sounds True Media in October. Originally from New England, she currently lives in Maryland with her husband and their 3 children, where competing piles of Lego bricks and books cover most of the surfaces of her house. I hadn't read this before, so that struck me as funny. Catherine Newman has written numerous columns, articles, and canned bean recipes for magazines and newspapers, and her essays have been widely anthologized. She is the author of the novel We All Want Impossible Things, the memoirs Waiting for Birdie and Catastrophic Happiness, the middle grade novel One Mixed Up Night, and the best-selling kids' life skills book How to Be a Person and What Can I Say? She lives in Amherst, Massachusetts. Meghan and Catherine will be in conversation with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Deborah's thrillers examine puzzles of identity. Reef Road, a national bestseller, was named one of the best books of 2023 by Kirkus Reviews and an Indie Next pick by the American Booksellers Association. Ruby Falls won the Zibby Award for Best Plot Twist, and Finding Mrs. Ford was hailed by Forbes, Book Riot, and Good Morning America's Best Of lists. She began as an actress on All My Children and in multiple films before transitioning to the role of story editor at Miramax Films, developing Emma and early versions of Chicago and A Wrinkle in Time. With her husband Chuck, Deborah restored the Avon Theater, the Ocean House Hotel, the Deer Mountain Inn, the United Theater, Martin House Books, and numerous Main Street revitalization projects in Rhode Island and the Catskills. After the discussion, we're going to open the floor up to questions, and again, we'll be coming around with a microphone. So now, without further ado, let's welcome our authors.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, ladies. Catherine, Meghan. So I'm going to address all of you for a minute. One of the most fun things we do here is having more than one author at a time. And for me, it's always a process of kind of a treasure hunt, of discovery, of what ties one book to the other. And there are very strong ties, even though we have a novel and we have a memoir. And it was Meghan, you proposed that we have the two of you together, and I couldn't be happier. So thank you.
I've been working the long game to do an event with Catherine because her first book was the book I gave to not your first book, the first book of yours that I read, We All Want Impossible Things, was the book I gave to every single person that I gave a gift to for Christmas several years ago.
Meghan told Catherine that the event was in Newport. Where Catherine is now staying.
Also,
and here we are.
Also has beautiful homes. Also a place with many beautiful homes.
I always like to begin by asking the authors to give everybody hates the term elevator pitch, but kind of your short and concise version of what your books are about. So Catherine, will you begin? I'm going to make you begin.
Okay, I will begin. Sandwich is, it's kind of 2 books smashed together. On the one hand, it is, I'll tell you the elevator pitch I got trained to make, and then I'll tell you the real elevator pitch. The elevator pitch I got trained to make by my publicist in England, it's a beach novel about multiple generations sharing a beach house for a week, and kind of the emotional highs and lows of that experience. What it also is like a kind of book about reproductive mayhem. And that's what I was trained to not keep saying.
Imagine why.
Like it's about menopause and just the sort of reproductive body and layers of memories of being in that body and of being at the beach with children.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Megan?
I know I'm supposed to talk about my book, but I hope you bought Catherine's book. And if you didn't, I hope you do. On page 24, there is the most extraordinary 2 facing pages of the description of what it's like to grow a family. Like, it makes me want to cry now. Aww. Just the quickest version of going to a home with children who are there in diapers and going to a home with parents who are aging and children who are leaving the home. It's Don't leave here without it. Okay, my book. So my book is End of the Hour, and the elevator pitch, which is the true story of it, is that I've worked as a trauma therapist, specializing in grief and loss, helping people who have the kind of grief that doesn't resolve on its own and ends up needing treatment. I'm trained in all of those things. My dad died of small cell cancer in 2017, which was the experience that many people have. Very sad, very hard, but it didn't knock me off my horse. My mom died in 2019, and I almost immediately experienced PTSD. And so the story is very much, minute by minute, what it's like to really go down hard in a grief experience, and then also the meta of being a highly skilled trauma therapist who knew exactly what was happening to her and knew that I was not going to beat it, that I was going to need help. So in the book, that's what you see, is me really working to get that help.
And if I can add an addendum to your description, just as a way of understanding the way this story is constructed, is you arrive at the facility where she's going to be an inpatient, and they're like, we don't understand, you have a lot of connections to people here. Are they family members? And you have to be like, they're clients. Or their patients.
Yeah, they were like, do you want us to send your files to these 26 people?
And you were like, I do not.
I think they don't want to see my file. It's not going to instill confidence.
It would be counterproductive. So sticking with you, Megan, for a minute. So the book is subtitled A Therapist's Memoir, because, that is kind of the point, finding yourself in this position. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about you. It is one thing to counsel people. It is one thing, what is that old joke about why do Catholics believe in miracles? Because the priest advises you on marriage, she's never been married, advises you on child rearing, etc. So there you are.
Yep.
You have counseled people through this. And as a therapist, so you said just now, you knew what was going on, but what I really want to know is, were you startled by it? Were you, was there an extra level of being kind of shocked by what was happening because it was happening specifically to you?
Yeah, I am a therapist who did a decade of therapy, 2-3 times a week on her own dime. So my understanding of the work that I was doing with clients was that, I've done the work and now I'm here to guide you through the work. So I really thought, and this is 5 years ago, I really thought that the experience, the way that I often talk about it, because I had early childhood loss and then lost a number of friends in my young adulthood and other loved ones, I really thought I just had my experiences with grief and loss early. I know a lot about it. I am interested in it. I'll be one of those people who does a lot of helping in it. But I've learned so much that will act as a life preserver against the possibility of me falling out of the boat. So I was in the book, when I learned that my mother died, almost instantaneously, I have this thought, which clinically we would call a rumination. So one of those brutal thoughts that sort of inserts itself into your mind that shouldn't be there, but it's very hard to fight against. My thought was, it's your fault she died. I had known she was ill. She knew she was ill. and I was with her when she died, and it was like watching a truck come for you. I don't know if anyone's ever been in a car accident where like you can see it coming, but you know you can't get out of the way. And I, in that moment, as that thought was coming for me, was like, oh, this is what all my clients were describing.
Right.
Right? Like that PTSD, I say this all the time, it's like reading about France, studying the language of France, and then going to France and being like, oh, this is what salted butter tastes like. This is what you meant.
Such a good metaphor.
Yeah.
So I want to tie something you just said to an aspect of your novel. So in Sandwich, Rocky, the protagonist, she is in the stage of life known as menopause, which fortunately I'm on the other side of that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So you talked about, you see this thought you're having, this ruminative thought that you know you shouldn't have, it inserts itself and you can't shake it loose. So Rocky, you write really beautifully this thing that maybe you guys don't do this. Rocky is, against her better judgment, mad at her husband often. She knows she shouldn't be. She knows he really didn't do anything wrong. And I love the way you write it. He will ask a question. Did you, I don't know, bring the water to the table? She will answer it in her mind. Oh, I forgot to bring the water to the table. But then she'll say something completely different to him that is more confrontational. It's more aggressive. And you do this 3-part thing that I found so simple, but so illustrative of that catching yourself, saying what you really know you shouldn't do and say. Can you talk a little bit about writing it just like that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I totally know. Oh, no, I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's funny, Michael, sorry, that husband, a real life version of him is here tonight. Michael, what's that movie where the kid keeps seeing the thing? Yes! God, you're the best. So there was a movie we saw a long time ago, Toto the Hero. Probably no one saw this movie, but in it, it's sort of from the perspective of this little kid, and there'll be a scene where like a teacher speaks to him sharply, and Toto leaps up on the desk and like wrings his neck and like slices it with a knife, and you're like, oh my God, and it turns out he's just imagining it, and then in the scene he's just like, okay. And I love that so much because so much of life is like the wrestling between, you know, your inner thoughts and what you communicate, which is also because it's a book that's a lot about secrecy.
Yes.
That's another version of that. Or even the fact that like you're out in the world communicating, but you're also living in a body that's having its own life that you're sort of concealing the whole time. You know what I mean? Where like stuff's going on, but like our convention is to conceal that and not be like just a body engaging with everyone. You engage as like a put together like brain kind of in a tidy shell. So anyway, all those layers, I was just interested in them. But that one is
And she does it over and over, a little bit the opposite of Toto, because Toto is acting out the aggressive fantasy and saying the quiet thing.
yes.
Rocky is very often agreeing with people in her mind, but
And
then
saying something
perversely saying the opposite, perversely going for the jugular.
You're so right.
And
yeah,
that's
it's really
what
different.
I was so sparked by, because again, none of you have ever done this, provoked an argument when you shouldn't have, said something.
No, I would
just
never
to go at
do
the
that.
other person.
No. I just was imagining
Yes,
being
right.
that kind
Yeah.
of person.
Good imagination.
Thank you.
So I want to go back to your grief. So a term I had heard, a very dear friend of mine lost her father when she hadn't spoken to him for years. And I am not a therapist. I may say the wrong thing, but someone said to me, oh, that's complex grief and it's very hard. And that rang true with me. And I think that's what you write about. So my mother died 6 months ago. And while I had a very complex relationship with my mother, she had this extraordinary, expressive, clear, communicative, wrapped up death, where I'm floating around feeling like I've been given a gift. And I am grieving and missing her, but it was, I feel I was part of something that was next level that I don't even understand. So can you talk about what your relationship was with the person influences the grief, and the death experience influences the grief?
Yeah. It's funny because that's such a theme also in your book is the way that you experience the loss of people. And Deborah, I'll say part of the reason, so when my dad died of cancer that I at least knew. I have 5 brothers and sisters. I won't speak for them, but I knew the diagnosis that he had was a death sentence. And so it's a little bit like sipping cups of grief instead of being waterboarded by grief. Like sudden loss it's like a full contact sport. Mm-hmm. So when I came out the other side, there's this whole, like, you got to write an obituary and you have to have the funeral and, all of those elements of things that almost buoy you in the moments. So I didn't know. I knew the PTSD thought was there, but I didn't know I was going to lose the battle with that thought really until all the things that needed to be done were done. Mm. And what really struck me was I started to not be able to orient myself to myself without my mom. That her eyes on me had always been there and had always helped to define who I thought I was. And part of that is we suffered the loss of my cousin when I was really young. I was 9. And my mom, I think, had PTSD from that. She was there when he drowned. She was there when he was pulled out of the water. And she got sick in that kind of way in the late 70s that nobody ever defines or talks about again. And I developed a codependent relationship with her that I had addressed. Codependent meaning I was always kind of checking, how are you doing? Before I checked with myself. Not maybe in the alcoholic way of here, have a drink, but more in that are you all right? And when my dad died, I started doing that again and didn't notice. I mean, I lived in DC, I wasn't close to her, but I started doing that again without realizing. I was sort of hey, are you all right? What are you doing for Christmas? What are you doing? And when she died, there's a scene in the book where I am sitting on a seawall watching my siblings, and I sort of begin to feel myself fall apart. Mm-hmm. And it still happens. And I just feel that's important to say, that PTSD is something that you live with. The way that I miss my mother making me make sense to myself, that's an everyday thing. It is. So the loss of her was I put this on my Instagram the other day. I was I just miss the way I knew who I was. Yeah. When she would look at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is why the loss was so tremendous, was that it just felt like I fell into a puddle, and I really was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to, and in fact I wasn't going to be able to become a human again. And I really had a hard time being around people who looked at me like they thought they knew who I was. I really had a hard time. In fact, I deeply damaged some friendships because people would sit and sort of say how are you doing? Because I had showered and looked normal. They were treating me like I was normal. Mm-hmm. And I just was I'm not even the shell of who you think I am.
So this point you're making about how we can define ourselves by how we're seen by our parents. I'm going to go back to Rocky, your protagonist. So she is obviously sandwiched between her young adult children and her aging parents. And she's the voice of the novel. And her attention goes so much to each and every one of them. And you write very well that experience, I think, of being a woman. I can't speak about being a man. And by putting them, and I suspect it was intentional, in this tiny, tiny house where no one can avoid anyone else. Will you talk about that? I mean, was that a house you knew and it was easy to write, or did you just make it up out of whole cloth to force them so close together?
It was a house that I knew, and an experience that I was very familiar with. And I think there's something about a really constrained space that makes everyone, it's whatever that like physics property is or something, that like the combustiveness of that. Although, it's quite harmonious, but still there's a lot of rubbing against each other that makes stuff come out. And so I did want that. Like I wanted a small time frame, a little house, a small number of characters, and just for it to be like that.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
The cold and blustery days of winter, when New Englanders are holed up with nowhere to go and nowhere to be, are the perfect time to curl up with a good book. If you or someone in your life that enjoys whiling away the hours by getting lost in the pages of a novel, why not present them with a book by hotelier, actress and nationally best-selling and award-winning author Deborah Goodrich Royce. Start with Deborah's latest thriller, Reef Road, a Publishers Weekly, Good Morning America, and American Booksellers Association pick. This true crime-inspired novel of suspense and high society in Palm Beach probes unhealed generational scars and a wrenching and original work of fiction. To learn more about the fascinating life and times of the author and her other page-turning mysteries, Finding Mrs. Ford and Ruby Falls, visit DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com.
And we're back with the Ocean House Author Series on WCRI.
I'm going to stick with you for a minute. So being there, so obviously sandwich has multiple meanings, and Rocky the mom makes sandwiches every day. It's kind of a thing. I mean, we can talk about food as and that it's something she does. They go there. You walk us through the rituals of going to this place, the purchasing of the food. I mean, the things that they do, and it's very anchoring. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I try to talk about it as a fictional book.
Try that.
It's just all true.
I'm
it really
just
happens.
trying. So like Rocky, food is like my idiom of expressing love. That is, that's how I can express love. Like the kids are coming home. They're adults in their young adult lives. They're coming home. Food is the way I prepare for this arrival of them. I have like a whole way I do it where it's everything they want, but not so much that it depresses them. You know what I mean? Where they don't arrive home and be like, oh, Mom, Jesus, like get a life. Like it's such a fine line where it's totally. It has to look a little casual.
So good.
Where I'm like, quick, Michael, take a bite out of that cake. Like, where I just want it to be like, oh, we just live like this. Even without you. We don't just eat tomatoes for dinner, if that's what you thought. Like, oops, did I say that out loud? Whatever. So that's the food. And I do think there's the way that like the making and eating of food is always that occasion for those like sideways conversations. And the sandwiches is, it's like the way people differ. It's like the way your kids differentiate from you. Sometimes it's because they become like, like a religious zealot. And sometimes it's because like they like a different kind of sandwich from you, and you're like, we don't like that. As a family, we don't eat that kind of mustard. Like, what happened to you? What did college do to you? I don't know. So it's just a lot.
It's funny that you say that with grief and sandwiches. My mother always said, and my daughter Tess is sitting right here, my mother always said, as though it was this family characteristic that we've passed down through the centuries, we don't like ketchup.
Exactly.
And we, in fact, don't like ketchup. Yeah. We, in fact, like mustard and mayonnaise. But I think maybe, have you
we
broken
have ketchup
out
on our ketchup
to
in my house.
Yeah. She's broken out. Yeah. So, Meghan, so you also write Cape Cod.
I do.
So I want to talk about
I grew up near Sandwich.
This idea of, you've each written, in your case specifically it's memoir, yours is fiction, such as we write fiction. We never use ourselves.
Would never, no.
So very important, I think, in both of your books, and I'd like you to address this. It's a resort place. It's a vacation place. It's a place where you're supposed to leave your troubles behind. Yeah. So how did that impact you with the death of your mother that had happened there?
This is going to sound like I'm not answering the question, but I feel like it's important to say that I didn't intend to write a memoir, that most of where this book began was that I was just sort of therapeutically writing through myself. So I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with these words swirling in my head. So I was writing about the place a lot. And I honestly think that part of the reason that I got sick was that it felt like, as I was leaving, we always knew, my parents had this big house, it was on the water, and I have 5 brothers and sisters. And so we always knew we were not going to inherit this house. That was not what was going to happen. And so and I never, ever, ever, I mean this so sincerely, took for granted the space. It was a beautiful, breathtaking space, but I am actually someone who doesn't think you own your home. I think it's just, you get to live there because those houses outlive us. So I love the place in a way that is hard to describe, like as much as I love a person. I love the town, I love the quirks of it. And it felt like, as I was leaving that house, that I was also losing the house and the beach and the property and the life that had held me through my whole adulthood, and that was going unacknowledged or said, right? Because it wasn't like they put a stake and was like, for sale. And in fact, COVID hit, so I ended up, ironically, being the person to clean out that house. So I left thinking, I'm never coming back here. And in fact, I was there for 4 months and literally folded and gave away and threw away and, donated every single item that my parents had ever owned. I mean, it's just that's not in the book, but that's a whole sort of separate component. And I, grief is a lot about attachments, right? Like it's the disruption and attachment. So we don't just grieve people, we grieve identities, and we grieve the loss of relationships, and we grieve pets, and we grieve, but I do think there's a scene in the book that I write about. I have this dream that I eat the dirt of my mother's garden, and I wake up and I sort of think it happened, because what I think of in this quantum physics way is that's where her life went. She spent hours and hours and hours. She could have had an irrigation system. She had this big, beautiful house with this huge lawn that she hand watered because she wanted to. Right. And I just wanted to like reconsume her life. And you have scenes in your book where you talk about Rocky leaning into her son and like smelling him and wanting, and it really reminded me of that sensation of like, you're in this moment, but there's the past that was so precious and the present and the future that's coming so fast that you kind of want to eat it or inhale it or rub yourself down with it so that it doesn't stay separate from you.
Right. Well, I just cleaned out 2 properties from my mother, one in Florida and one up here, and my daughter Tess was part of this. And someone said to me as we were about to take this on, they said, oh, we're going to do Swedish death cleaning. We're not going to leave anything for our kids to go through. Yeah. To me, that is so colossally depressing. It's such a horrible idea. I have loved every minute of looking at why the hell my mother had this weird glass, or why she has this envelope of $2 bills, until I found my own. I had an envelope of $2 bills, and I didn't even remember as I was judging her harshly.
You're like, we don't like ketchup, we have $2 bills. That's who we are.
We're sticking with it. I have found the whole thing so profoundly meaningful, and I even got to the point where I have a whole area of boxes that I wasn't able to get to, because we're down to like the greeting cards and the letters with random bills in there and photographs and buttons and odd earrings. And I thought, I have to put this aside now. I'm at a saturation point, and I will throw something away I don't want to throw away. But I have loved it so
It is such an honor.
So much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I right
so
after
deep.
my mom died, I walked around her room just sort of like touching her stuff. It is such an honor. For me, part of it was a burden in that my mom loved like little German figurines that were ducks that were supposed to be valuable but are not actually valuable. She had a lot of those china cabinets.
Ducks.
You know?
Yeah.
And I knew that I was not up to the reverence that she would have instilled in these items had she been able to choose about them. So there was a lot of conversation that she and I were having where I'd be like, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to give these to the charity shop. I'm so sorry. She had worked in a charity shop, so it was terrific but I felt both things. I felt such unbelievable, and there was so much mirth in it. Like, I opened a closet and I found 2 rolls of wrapping paper from when we lived on the North Shore of Massachusetts when I was a child, like with the sticker still on from the store. That like this wrapping paper was from like 1981, and I'm being generous. Just the idea that was somehow in this house was, you know, it's like, lady, you are practically a hoarder. So there was so much conversation, but I did feel, I wrote an essay about this. My mom sewed everything. So she reupholstered and she stripped floors and wallpapered things. And I had thought I was going to be able to donate her curtains, and sort of like at the last minute, I didn't realize she had sewn them to the curtain rods to make them, you know, like just be perfect. And so, and there were like 50 of them, and the people were coming, and I had a window of 30 minutes and I ended up having to throw most of that fabric away. And that was just, you know, even now I'm like, I'm so sorry. I tried my best. I know they meant something to you.
She understands.
I think she'll, you know, I've done worse things
she's
that she
with
would
you there.
forgive me for.
So, Catherine, we're going now to menopause. So Rocky
Come with us
is
on
in
a journey.
Do join us right here, right now. Jenny's waving herself.
This looks like our crowd.
I am going to preamble this. For me, menopause was fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. I suffered from decades of debilitating menstrual migraines.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
same, by the way, same.
And there was a cessation of that. So that was very liberating. And it was also the moment of the empty nest, which was very liberating. And I really got serious
Don't take that the wrong way.
Sorry, Tess.
Don't take that the wrong way.
None taken, yeah.
So for me, the way I've said it, and I will say it again, I felt like I got the real estate in my brain back. I felt like the perimenopause period was foggy brain and all that other stuff. And then there was just this release and clarity on the other side of it. So Rocky's in it, and it is a huge component of the book, because it's absolutely true, all the things she's observing about the changes in her body. So you write very candidly about all that, and I'd like you to talk about that.
Sure. I'm really happy for you. I say with no rancor.
How nice.
No, I'm
No, wait, I have to say I'm older, though.
I know,
so
I know.
I'm on the far end.
To be perfectly frank, it's getting a little better. But I think, here's what I think. I think that this is how I've been trying to explain this, but you know, you're like 10, right, or you're 9, or whenever it is you read Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, if you're our age.
Yes.
Or you take whatever class, girls' health, or whatever you take at school that tells you about menstruation, whatever it is. And this is what I feel like we were taught. I feel like we were taught, you were like a little girl, and this train came along and stopped at your station, and you gently got on it, and that train was your fertility. And you rode this train. You just sat as a gentle passenger on this train for 40 years. And then you got off at a different station. You were an old lady. Yeah. That is not at all what it's like.
That's not what it's like.
But you know what I mean? Where it's like, you get your period, and then in a few decades it ends. It's like, oh, it doesn't end. Like, it comes at you with a hatchet, murderously for years, and then you're like a different person.
Right.
So I just felt like I wanted to try to get at some of the way that it was almost like another character in the house with her. That it's like the family just sees the family, and she's like, it's us, and then it's this beast that has her by the throat.
Right. And that is true. That passage is true. That all the complete lack of control of one's physical body.
Yeah, that.
And Rocky spends a lot of time observing just the beauty of the kids, their bodies, the physicality of it all. You write that so well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So talk about this idea of where you started before, kind of this reproductive life, vis-a-vis Rocky, vis-a-vis the kids. And it is a theme that runs throughout, whether one is very fecund, one is not. It's all happening in that little house.
So, I mean, it goes back a little to what I was saying earlier about the way you're kind of in your body while doing all these other things. Like you're on vacation, and I'm now not speaking about Rocky, I'm just speaking personally, but Rocky happens to also feel this way. But that feeling, like, especially if you've been going to the same place, so you have these layers of memories, Rocky compares it to a Matryoshka doll, that feeling like the way the kids are all their little selves, and also all the years are telescoped in this place, so everything reminds you of something else, like the way her daughter finds these massive maxi pads, and she's like, oh yeah, that was from the year I was miscarrying. Like they're still in the house, this archaeology of reproduction and loss, and I guess I just feel like there's a way that kind of experience with all those layers, like when I look back at my life for the last however many years, it's like that was the summer I was pregnant. That was the summer I was nursing. That was the summer I was still nursing, was pregnant again. That was the summer we had a baby and the kids had the flu. That was the summer I was miscarrying. Like, it's just this weird, history, even though the kids are like, that was the summer I got fudge instead of saltwater taffy. Like these different intersecting sets of memories of what the trip meant to everybody. And it's not like the rest of it wasn't real, it's not like you connect a set of dots and that's the only true story. It's all real. It also was amazing, and she loved it, and the kids are so precious to her, but it was also really hard, and it was also really painful.
Right. Before we open it to questions, I want to start with you, Meghan, and I'd like you both to talk a little bit about this. I tend to feel, and I'd love your thoughts on this, that the parent-child relationship, whichever end you sit on it, and many of us get to sit on both ends of that relationship, to me it's kind of the primal schoolroom here on this planet. I think there's so much we're working out, this end and this end, and I'd love you both to talk about that a little bit, starting with you.
What I was thinking when you were talking just a second ago, and I'll speak about Rocky, that there's something very lonely about her in menopause to me. And there is something fundamentally, right? So that menopause is this physical experience. It starts with puberty. We give all this education to kids in the beginning about puberty. Before they go through it, we're like, look, it's going to get wild. And part of that is so that they don't feel afraid. We don't do any of that with grief and loss. We actually do none of that, even though we grieve with our bodies, just like we have menopause in our bodies. So when I was reading Rocky, there is something lonely, like alone, that felt so real about grief to me, which is, people like to say, like, you're not alone, but you absolutely are alone. I mean, you are. We're not alone existentially in the experience, but I have 5 brothers and sisters, but I lost my mother, they lost their mothers, you know?
Yeah.
So there is when I think about my role as a parent, why didn't anyone ever tell me how terrifying parenting is? That never came up, I swear to God. There was like, oh, it's hard, and but the constant, like, what if I'm screwing them up? What if this is the one decision that then drives them into, trauma therapy later?
What if they die?
What if they die? What if they die? What if I die? What if? And so there is this, like, and for me, when I got sick, I was too sick to be terrified that this might be the moment, right? There's a thing that people say, like, oh, well, I couldn't do that because I had to take care of my kids. I couldn't take care of my kids. I would have loved to have been the person who was like, well, I couldn't stay in bed all day because I had to take care of my kids. I couldn't take care of my kids. And the fascinating thing for me as a trauma therapist and as a child who had trauma is that I actually feel this weird freedom, having not been able to protect my kids from me. And I feel more connected to them and less alone than I did in some of my early parenting. Because I'm like, my daughter has OCD. It developed during COVID. She doesn't mind me talking about it. I don't have OCD. I don't know what that's like for her. And since she started taking medicine, she's kind of had to be responsible for her medicine. She's had to let me know when she's having a hard time. She has to call when she's having a panic attack, and then she has to get herself through it.
How old is she?
She's 16, but it started during COVID, so she was 12 when it started, and I missed it. So I'm a trauma therapist, and I was like yelling at her for not reading, because she reads a lot, and I was like, what are you doing? Why are you not reading? She came in, and the minute her mouth opened, I was like, oh my God. And she said, I want to tell you why I'm not reading. It's because I can't stop counting. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I'm trained in that, and I missed that. So there's this weird, to take your phrase of telescoping, I often call it accordioning, where, like, I have a lot of forgiveness for my parents that I can't afford them. I can't call them and say, God, I blamed you for a lot of stuff in my 20s that I just now have a lot of grace about. Like, you were doing the best you could, nobody taught you. And even when you're taught, it's really, really hard. And I have this loosening around, like, you guys are gonna have to figure this out. I can't talk to my kids about what it was like to get a bad text from a friend, because I never got a bad text from a friend when I was 14, or use Snapchat, or I need them to teach me that. So there's this odd, like, loosening around responsibility of who is supposed to take care of whom, that I need, in a way that when they were little, I was like, I am the rock for you. I believed that. And now I don't know that was ever, I don't know if that's ever really true. I think we are all interdependent, codependent, reliant, and dependent on each other in different formats. And one of the reasons I'm just, like, mad and obsessed with your book is that I feel that in Rocky. I feel like she is in the middle, smushed in the middle of this family and off on her own kind of the whole time. And there's this gorgeous moment where her son announces he's getting married. And she loses herself for this second in enthusiasm and excitement. She's like, oh, you can get married here in the house and whatever. And he very gently says back to her, like, well, we might do it some other way. You know, and she's like, of course, of course. And I just love her so much in this moment because she's like holding herself tight and away and she just lets herself go in this enthusiasm. And I feel like since my mom died, since I got sick, I let myself go in that enthusiasm sometimes more than I ever did before. I'm answering the question in a nutso way.
It is an answer to the question. The question was, you know, do you address this idea that this is really the primal schoolroom, the parent-child, you know, dynamic. I'd love you to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, that was so, I mean, that's such an amazing way to think about it. Like what you're describing is this kind of like decentering yourself in their lives in a way that gives you a little more freedom, like gives them more freedom and you more freedom and then more like agency. And I think that in my book, Rocky's struggling to do that, like quite openly. And there's, you know, part of what happens to her in the book is that, and this I have some experience with in real life, her incredibly wise and loving daughter becomes a little bit of a caretaker of her, not in a, like just kind of in a conversational way, but like her daughter's sort of tracking her the way she's always tracked the kids. And that is an incredibly moving, I mean, I know it's double-edged because I feel like even as I'm saying, I'm also just aware that I'm not wearing waterproof mascara, so I don't want to make myself cry. I'm like,
I do have a tissue.
Hang on 1 sec. Okay, I have one tucked one into my sleeve, like your aunt Sadie. But you have that moment that's such a, like it's a, I want to say for your character, who's you? It's such a terrifying moment of where your daughter is like, oh, I can't come because I have to take care of mom. Like, I don't think I can leave my mom. Like, I can't come to your house. And I feel like that's this incredibly, like the book turns on that moment in this way. Like, that's the moment where you're like, okay, I need help. Like, I can't be this. I can't be this person. Like, I can't recreate all this, like, trauma. And it's so, and this is terrible. I'm just going to be a little confessional. And even though you don't even acknowledge it in the book because I think it's such a painful memory for you and it's so obviously emblematic of disorder, but there's also something so beautiful that you've raised this kid to be so loving. You know, like, I don't feel like the person writing that book, you in that moment, can even look at it that way. But it is so beautiful, too. Anyway, the way that you craft that story so that by the time we get to that, we understand 1,000 things about what it means. It's so incredible.
Very well said.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
The cold and blustery days of winter, when New Englanders are holed up with nowhere to go and nowhere to be, are the perfect time to curl up with a good book. If you or someone in your life that enjoys whiling away the hours by getting lost in the pages of a novel, why not present them with a book by hotelier, actress and nationally best-selling and award-winning author Deborah Goodrich Royce. Start with Deborah's latest thriller, Reef Road, a Publishers Weekly, Good Morning America, and American Booksellers Association pick. This true crime-inspired novel of suspense and high society in Palm Beach probes unhealed generational scars and a wrenching and original work of fiction. To learn more about the fascinating life and times of the author and her other page-turning mysteries, Finding Mrs. Ford and Ruby Falls, visit DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com.
And we're back with the Ocean House Authors Series on WCRI.
I think we're going to open it up to your questions. While the microphone is going around, I'm going to tell a little story. My last novel, Reef Road, was written because my mother's best friend was savagely murdered in 1948 when my mother was 12, and she was stabbed 36 times at home. My mother was supposed to have been there that night. My grandmother, for some random reason, said no, not any reason, and it's an unsolved crime, and it became, as you can imagine, a seminal event in my mother's life, my daughter's lives, and turned it into a twisty thriller, but an examination of generational trauma, in fact, because I couldn't write it as non-fiction, because it really involves another family who murdered this girl. I think it was a much older brother, most people do, but I didn't want to, that wasn't the point of the book. I really wanted to look at trauma and conferred trauma, next door to not even just, it is generational trauma for us, but for my mom, it was this kind of tangential trauma. Yep. And it was a big deal. So on that note, any questions? Once you ask something.
Questions, we love questions.
So I will ask a question right now while we're waiting for you to get the mic. Do you, Catherine, feel that you will revisit this character of Rocky? Is there more of Rocky to come?
I mean, there's only Rocky, which is so annoying to me because I have no imagination. So I'm in the middle of another novel, and I was like, as a placeholder, I'm just going to make it be Rocky again.
Got it.
Because I can't think outside of this character. Yeah. So we'll see if it turns out to be a novel about a different character, but so far it's not.
It's not. Okay.
Yeah.
And we have a question there.
So I didn't get to read your book, but I have it, Megan. I'm very excited about it. It sounds just wonderful and might be helpful in a family member's life, so I'm hoping so. Catherine, I listened to both of your books. So I listened to Sandwich first, and then I loved the narrator so much that when I sampled your other book, the We All Love It, it's the same narrator?
It's not.
Or similar?
You mean...
Like when you listen to it on Audible?
Do you mean the reader?
The reader.
Yeah. Different.
Oh,
different readers.
But whatever, do you get to choose the narrator? Because they're they're just so...
Not really. They give you some samples, like people audition and you get to...
Very weird.
You get to listen, although like everything in publishing, I think they extend a certain amount of like grace, and they're like, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and then they just pick whoever they were going to pick.
But
where it's like, do you like this cover? We all love it.
them?
This is the cover. And you're like, it's great.
You could say a name. Like if there's a reader you really like who read your friend's book, I mean, they might not
Meryl
listen
Streep.
to you. Yeah, you could,
for
you
example.
could say,
I just
Deborah might be able to say a name.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I didn't get to say a
the
name.
super high budget ones, they sometimes have multiple actors reading
No, this
different
one was
sections or voices.
I thought they were just
I'm
very
so
well
glad.
narrated.
Good.
And,
Who read your book? Let's say her name out loud.
I don't know. Oh, God, I
We're
don't
on
know.
the radio. Let's shout out to her.
who's your best friend?
I can't remember. Jane.
I can look at my
Yay,
phone.
Jane.
I'm so bad with names. It's so embarrassing to be called out on it. I like hardly know my own
Jane
name.
can call into the radio.
Jane somebody, who's really awesome. But I haven't listened to them in the way of like, by the time I'm done with them, I can't
With
quite
memoir, it's
deal.
yourself. That's
Yeah,
I've
With
narrated
memoir,
my
it
own
is
memoir.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole different
Do you
thing.
feel like her voice, like, did it work for you?
Oh, it was wonderful.
I'm so glad.
That's such a weird,
Good report.
disconnected answer, which I didn't expect. I would have thought that you sat together
No.
and like, because her like...
No, they send you a list of words where they're like,
Pronunciation guide.
how do you pronounce this? And then there's like a little, you make a little audio clip where it's like, Schlemiel, Schlemazel, Schmagegi. Like honestly, all of mine were like crazy Yiddishisms. I was like, I got these. Okay, we're good.
And I'll say one thing about pronunciation. I was listening to a friend's book. It was set in New York with a boy in school in New York, and the reader kept referring to the school as St. Bernard's. And I thought, wait, no. Wait, am I crazy? No. So I called her. I said, hey, did you listen to your book? Because they're calling St. Bernard's St. Bernard's. She's like, no.
Oh, no.
They were able to fix it because they can go in and re-record the one word.
Aren't you so glad you bothered?
Yes.
That's a good friend.
Yes.
Wow. That's the publishing you've got spinach
Elsa
in your
has
teeth.
a question.
Okay.
Elsa and I are co-mamas. Our children are married to each other, and they're sitting. Where's Danny stepped out?
My daughter-in-law is here, but my son. You know, one of the things that interests me is that I think that, you know, gender matters all your life, but that from the moment you get your period, really all the way through, way past menopause, it's just at the bottom, you know, it's there. And I think you both are addressing that in different ways. And it's all rough, you know, rough and tumble.
Yeah.
Right.
It is rough and tumble,
Yeah, I mean, don't want to be a teenager again. Don't necessarily want to be the parent of a young child.
Yeah.
Great being a grandparent, you know.
Yeah.
But it's all hard.
Yeah,
so true.
It's all hard. A novel.
I love that.
It's all hard. A memoir.
Yes.
It is.
All right, I have a piggyback question off of that. Considering all these hardships, all these things, I mean, I'm younger, I have not experienced any of these things, so I'm curious, in the writing process, how was it explaining these experiences? You know, were there some personal experiences that you both had? I know it's always different in the writing process, but what would you say was the most resonating portion of your books that really kind of brought you to? I'm forgetting the rest of my question.
No,
but essentially really resonated with you, and what was your process like through it, and how did you get through it, and discover all these further parts of your books?
Go ahead.
Process.
Hopefully that's not too complicated.
So I started by saying that I didn't intend to write a memoir. So my writing really was like a therapeutic tool that I was using that was mostly for myself. I had this extraordinary experience of joining a book club with Zibby Owens, who Deborah and I met through, who's my publisher. And she literally right before Christmas sent me a text that was like, I'm starting a imprint. Do you want to write a memoir? And I showed it to my husband and was like, what do you think this means? And he was like, what word are you confused by?
Do you want to write a memoir?
And so I really came into like the whole world of publishing sort of like excited to be invited to the party with a lot of confusion. The process for me really felt like I teach a class called Process to Product, where like the process was for me. The process, there's a whole, I think some of the strongest writing in my book is a chapter that I did not write until the very end of the book because I couldn't remember it. I could not remember the car ride from getting from my mother's house back to Washington, D.C. I couldn't remember it. Couldn't remember it at all. And I talked to a neuroscientist and they were like, just keep writing. The actual, you have brain damage essentially, and it's your brain defending against hard memories. Just keep writing. And I did. I woke up one day and was like, there it is. So for me, the writing process is this like deep mechanism of healing. And talking about the book is a deep mechanism of healing, and encouraging other people to write their own personal story is a deep mechanism of healing. The publishing process is a bit different. So the like inviting you, you know, I have 5 brothers and sisters. If you read the book, I don't name any of them, which when I told Zibby's team I was going to do that, they were like, that's never going to work. But it does really work, and it was really important to me because I didn't want to do damage inside those relationships by telling a story that wasn't accurate, and there's no possibility that you are going to get it accurate for someone else. And I'm in a couple of other people's memoirs, and they did hurt my feelings, so I just like knew the disaster of that. And also, I ended up having to have a lot of conversation with people, my husband, my best friend, and my kids, about, is this okay? I mean, there's a scene in there where basically I just screamed the F word at my husband and tried to throw him out of the house. And God love that man, which is how everyone feels at the end. Zibby said, you did not dedicate this book to your husband, and I am going to insist that you do, because people are going to want to know that you're still married, because they wouldn't have blamed, she didn't say that part. But I really wanted to make sure that he felt okay about how I represented things, you know, how I told the story. I think one thing that came out of sharing my personal story that I didn't expect is that by talking about my childhood, there were people who were present in my childhood that were like, I had no idea that this is, and that felt good, and also feels hard. It feels hard because they feel bad because there were hard things. So again, it sort of smushes, it disturbs the memories for some people when they hear your experience was different than what they knew of. So that when I was writing that, I was also writing a novel, and the novel, which Zibby has now, there's a scene, my mom and I go to Maine, and that's where she's sick, and my mom has this fever while we're in Maine, and she wakes up, and I went for a run, and she thought she had died. She like woke up in this, she didn't know where she was. You know how that feels where you're like, where the hell am I?
I love that scene.
So I come back and she's really scared. And then we talk about how funny it would be if like that had happened, if she had died and like maybe I was accused of murdering her, and so we have this funny moment. And that I wrote as a book.
Oh,
so I wrote that as a novel. That moment I wrote that as,
That's
and
so
that
awesome.
was a very, I think, cathartic, fun. It's not real. It's not my mom. It's actually not me as the characters. And you know, for somebody who hadn't written since she was in high school, it's a very interesting thing to like grow a whole new part of yourself as part of your trauma.
Yes.
That's a long answer to the short question.
And Catherine, do you want to speak a little bit about what was most resonant for you in this process?
Yeah, I mean, I love fiction for the way that you can write the absolute truth without worrying about hurting people.
Amen.
I find my fiction is so much truer than the memoirs I've written.
Absolutely. Yep.
Like I get at all the rock bottom stuff that I wouldn't write if it were memoir. That said, I did just tell the story of how our daughter, who reads everything I write first, she's just like this amazing person and a great reader, and she read Sandwich and she goes, Mom, you named the son Benji. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, that's Ben's name, which is our son. And I was like, oh, I was like, oh, it seemed so different. And she was like, it's not. Anywho,
It's out there now.
I think we're kind of there. We've gone over. This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us for this special broadcast of the Ocean House Authors Series with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Please tune in each month as we'll bring you a new Ocean House Authors Series highlighting nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation. Hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. The WCRI is pleased to be partnering with the Ocean House to bring you this ongoing series highlighting the best and the brightest of the literary world. Thank you once again for joining us. And in the words of Margaret Atwood, in the end, we all become stories.